What's up guys, Asian here with another Greymoor sort of behind the scenes video here, sneak peek discussion video. Today we're going to be discussing the mythic items. So for those of you guys who are kind of unaware of what's been going on, there was a Greymoor sneak peek that was released by quite a few content creators back in last week. Part of what they showcased during the sneak peek are what are called mythic items. They are part, or let's just say they are tied to, the two new skill lines that are coming out. I believe they're called Scrying and something regarding archaeology. I'm not 100%, I don't remember exactly what the skill lines are called, but part of that skill line it does involve discovering these mythic items, which are basically one piece items that impart some sort of benefit to you. You can only wear one mythic item at a time, and today we're going to see whether or not they're going to make their way into the PvE toolkit. It's a fairly interesting discussion, and part of it is going to depend on what these mythic item effects actually will end up being, which we'll hopefully see when the Greymoor PTS goes live in about a week or so. But I do want to kind of touch upon my personal thoughts right now about mythic items and whether or not I think they're going to get into the PvE sort of scene, or DPS specifically. Now, we don't really know what exactly the effects are going to be. We have some sort of idea because of the sneak peek, but that is still sort of, I don't want to say in the air, but it is still a work in progress when it was displayed last week. So we're not 100% certain exactly what these items are going to look like. But give me a second here while we swap over to, here. So Nephis was one of the content creators that happened to play the Greymoor sneak peek, and he did give us a look at the mythic items that he managed to get a look at. Again, it's still a work in progress. We're not 100% certain if these are going to make it into the game as is, or there might be change on the PTS. Now you'll see here that each of these mythic items is a armor piece. So you can see here it's either going to be jewelry, so rings and necklaces are here, or an actual armor piece, so one of the 7 armor pieces that you can currently wear, and they are going to be armor weight specific. So you can see here Bloodlord's Embrace is a heavy chest. Now I'm reading this as it's only going to be available as a heavy chest, but I could be wrong. They might make it so it's either a heavy, medium, or light chest, but it's still going to be a chest piece no matter what. Now, you can see here that Bloodlord's Embrace, after blocking an attack, you restore a certain amount of magicka, and this effect can occur every certain amount of seconds here. Now, obviously, this is not going to be a this is not going to be a DPS set because it's a heavy chest, but it could be a tank set. So this sort of ties into the whole DPS sort of look. We are going to briefly discuss how this is going to impact sort of tanks and healers as well, but I do kind of focus in more on the second set here, Thracian Stranglers, which is a light glove. So this might be a magic DPS piece that you might want to consider getting. So killing an enemy grants you a persistent stack of Slow's Call up to a maximum of X stacks. Each stack increases your spell damage by X, but also increases your damage taken by X. Removing Thracian Stranglers, crouching, or going invisible, it removes all stacks of Slow's Call. So basically, you're getting some more spell damage, but you're taking more damage in exchange. So this might be good for those sort of burst scenarios, or if you're in a very highly optimized group, or you really know what you're doing and you're able to sort of avoid any sort of damage that's incoming to you. But it is a one-piece set, which does sort of screw things up a little bit. So let's go back to ESO, and I'll show you guys what I mean. So I am on a Magic DK right now, and I'm playing a fairly traditional Magic DK, or just Magic DPS setup in general. Basically, we have a 5-piece set, we have 2 5-piece sets, and our Mazda Helm set. So we have a 5-piece set that's going to be active at all times. In this case, it's Mother's Sorrow, and we have a front bar set Sororia, as well as the Maelstrom's Inferno Staff. Now, despite the changes to light attacks, I still think the Maelstrom Inferno Staff is going to be very useful because it's still going to benefit you to Lightweave. So any additional damage that you get from your Lightweaves is obviously going to benefit your DPS. So I still think the Maelstrom Inferno Staff is going to be here to stay. So basically what this plays into is, are we capable of including a one-piece set with our current magicka DPS setup? So again, I remind you, we have a 5-piece set that's active at all times, we have a 5-piece set that's active while we're on our front bar, and we have a Monster Helm set. Breaking any of these means we are giving something up. We're either going to end up breaking a 5-piece set one of the two, regardless of whether that's the body or the front bar set, or we're going to have to give up a Mars to Helm set as a magic DPS. The stamina DPS, we have the same thing. We have a 5-piece set, Reliquin normally, as our body set, and then we have a front bar set, typically Laquestes, although that might change in the near future. We'll have to wait and see on that, and a Mars to Helm set, as well as a Maelstrom or Master's Bow on the back bar. And again, if we want to include a 1-piece set bonus, we're going to have to break one of those three things. Now, you might be saying, well, let's say we give up our Mars to Helm on a magic DPS. Let's say we break our Mars to Helm set so we have one-piece Mars to Helm set, for example, but we're still able to maintain our two 5-piece sets. Would that be a potential option? And I would argue that it could be an option. Now, less so for stamina DPS, more so for magic DPS, breaking your Mars to Helm set so you have two separate 1-piece bonuses is a thing for magic DPS specifically. So, for example, you might be running 1-piece Zaan and 1-piece Iceheart, so that way you get two spell crit bonuses. That's already fairly common to see in magic DPS. So, for magic DPS at the very least, I think Mythic Items, depending on whether they'll be stronger than adding in another spell crit bonus, they might be able to use these Mythic Items. So, the Thrashing Strangler set, you could end up using Thrashing Stranglers depending on what those values are going to end up being. If, for example, we get 3 stacks and we get 100 spell damage for each of those stacks, and we end up taking 2% additional damage taken when we have each stack, that's 60% additional damage taken and 300 additional spell damage. 300 spell damage is probably going to end up being stronger than 833 spell crit rating. So in that instance, yes, it would be worth running Thrashing Stranglers. Now, if it was something closer to 50 spell damage per stack with 3 stacks, 150 spell damage, that's not really going to end up beating 833 spell crit, in which case you're not really going to be using Thrashing Stranglers any longer. Now for stamina DPS, this is going to be a little bit trickier. While it is possible to wear 2 different 1-piece sets on stamina DPS, it's not unheard of. Typically speaking, it's going to be 1-piece Krog and 1-piece Slimecraw for the additional weapon crit. So most stamina DPS that do this are running Krog because they need additional physical penetration from the 1-piece there in order to get to the penetration cap. So you would basically have the same idea here where the mythic item would have to beat out that additional weapon crit. And this is not a very common occurrence, at least it's not as common as you would see on magic DPS. It's more common for stamina DPS to run a full Mars Helm set. Typically, it's going to be Marsalok, sometimes Celine's, particularly if you're like a Stamina Templar, for example. So a mythic item would, in this instance, have to beat out the DPS that a full Mars Helm set would able to provide, as well as beat out a 1-piece weapon crit if you're taking a look at the 1-piece Krog, 1-piece Slimecraw setup here. Now, that's going to be a fairly tall order to beat. Marsalok right now is contributing quite a bit of DPS. It really depends on, your total amount of debuffs and things like that, but it does contribute, I believe, anywhere between 3 to 5k DPS on a typical stamina DPS build with a fairly optimized group. So a single mythic item will need to basically beat out the equivalent of about 3 to 5k DPS or so if it wants to compete with the stamina Mars to Helm set. Now for magic DPS, that's not that big of a deal. The Mars Helm set that mythic items have to compete with is Zaan, which is fairly strong. It's still going to have to try to beat out 3 to 5k DPS, and magic DPS as well if it's going to be competing with Zaan. So all that combined, the fact that DPS can't really break their setup right now without giving up something, mythic items really have a relatively high bar to kind of meet here if DPS are going to end up using these mythic items. Now, you might be asking, what about support roles like tanks and healers? They also have their setups as well. So, for example, tanks, it's 2 5-piece sets and a Mars Helm set, typically Symphony of Blades. They have that same issue. Mythic items are basically going to need to give tanks or the group, basically supports in general, supports are going to need to justify breaking either their Mars Helm set or one of their 5-piece bonuses. Now, for support roles, it's a lot more complicated now because you don't want to break Symphony of Blades. That's a lot of resources you're giving up if you're breaking Symphony of Blades. They can't really run 2 1-piece Mars Helm sets as support roles because that just basically breaks the support that they're able to provide. The mythic items, if you're going to be wearing them as a support class, they're going to need to be able to either give you an immense amount of resource return to the group. They're going to basically need to make up a full 5-piece or 2-piece group support set bonus. To give you an idea, essentially a 1-piece mythic item set will basically have to give one person, if you want to compare it to Symphony of Blades, essentially the equivalent of about 400 to 500 regen. That is a very, very high bar to beat, so I don't think mythic items are going to make their way onto support roles, at least in PvE. And that's just because breaking a 5-piece set or a Mars Helm set, specifically Symphony of Blades, that's an incredibly high bar to beat for a mythic item, and I just don't think Zos is going to make mythic items that powerful. With DPS, on the other hand, it's possible, but the bar is still relatively high. So I'm not going to hold my breath that mythic items are going to be on DPS builds, but we'll just have to wait and see for the Greymoor PTS to see whether something like Thrashing Stranglers is going to make its way onto magicka DPS. That pretty much concludes this discussion. Let me know down in the comment section below what you would like to see mythic items, their effects be, and whether or not you're thinking about running them on your builds. I would be interested to know what you guys think about mythic items, especially once the Greymoor PTS is released in about a week or so. So we're going to be revisiting this obviously in about a week or so when Greymoor PTS finally hits the PTS servers. But that's it for me. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.